Well, good morning. This is Unit 7 from the IQI Academy for Leadership Fundamentals. I'd like to welcome you here today. I have a couple things that I'd like to follow up on. Certainly, we're making an effort to get our Teach to Learn conversations in, practicing our PDSA work, especially with developing our PDSA questions. We looked at what things we need, especially for the planning portion of the PDSA cycle. And then we want to have initiated the plan portion of our next PDSA. So we should be running at least one small test per week while we're doing the academy. We want to have an opportunity to do those tests and bring our work up to speed in that session, in that way. I'd like to ask a couple questions. Regarding our daily Teach to Learn conversations, here's a question that is review. And you can go back to your earlier unit or earlier session where you talked about learning principles. There's a handout that I have in the learning management system that I just put up today, but it's like this structure. So if you could take out a notepad or put something on your computer in a way, I'd like you to list for yourself, what are the learning principles that are integrated into your daily Teach to Learn conversations? So I'm going to give you a minute to list some of those things that we've talked about, that we said, okay, here's the things that Teach to Learn actually contributes to as we do our work in these conversations. So as you fill this out, I'd like you to, I'm going to ask each of you at least one of these. So Megan, what's one learning principle that's integrated into our Teach to Learn conversations?
I put like how you feel like when you're explaining, like when you're talking about whatever, like what's the word I want to use? Like whatever you're explaining that you learned for the day. I don't know.
Are you
I don't
talking
think I
about some
had
version
enough coffee yet.
are you talking about some version of self-awareness? Is that, or is it
Yeah,
some, yeah, okay. All right, Denise, what's
yeah.
another learning principle that's integrated into our Teach to Learn conversations?
I put repetition, but I wasn't sure if that was the right principle. But the more you talk about whatever the teaching concept is with other people, the more it becomes concrete for you, the more they learn. So
Yeah, okay, Joe?
Seeing other people's point of view on topics.
I got it. Okay, Eric?
I've just been trying to remove barriers with the team that we have, with the concept of audits and things like that, trying to figure out a way to get rid of those, but yet still maintain a good standard.
Okay, so Teach to Learn conversations give you an opportunity to remove barriers between team members, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Heidi?
Yeah, I've been trying to listen to the person's nonverbal communication skills when I'm trying to teach them too, because what they are showing me, is also helping me see if I need to stop and ask them questions, if they, need anything repeated.
Okay. And then Rayanne, you just joined us. We're talking about the learning principles that are embedded in our daily Teach to Learn conversations. I'm asking each person for what's at least one learning principle that is part of or integrated into our daily teach to learn conversations?
I would say we would need to be good listeners. I mean, we have to ask the questions, but we also have to listen to what our responses are getting.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm going to also ask this question. Why you excuse me. Why you think about what practices and structures support you having daily teach to learn conversations. So let's go through some of the things that we've brought to the forefront during the course. So one of the principles that's required is useful learning requires remembering and not forgetting. So that's a principle that's embedded in our teach to learn conversations, is that we're trying to make sure that we limit or arrest forgetting. So it's a method which limits that, because we can't learn if we're forgetting immediately as soon as we walk away from our session. Oh, what did we just cover? It doesn't do any good if we can't remember it. And then, of course, methods that limit or arrest forgetting include elaboration, because when you're doing teach to learn, you're actually you're taking a concept that we talked about and putting it into your own words. That's what elaboration is. Retrieval is one of those that says, I need to think about it, remember it. So you've got that neurons that wire together conversation going on. As we retrieve things, we remember them better. And then, of course, we're practicing the concept. Oftentimes, as some of you have mentioned, we practice it with our team members or coworkers as we try to look at how does that practice work with our situation. We also, because we work with others, we're adding context to our memories about the concept. So no longer is it just the Zoom screen, that you have memories that will help trigger some concepts. But as you remember talking about something about psychology or about your project work, you have 14 points, where you were, who you were with, are all adding context to your memory. And then, of course, one of the most powerful things that we have that's built into these is we're creating a network of conversations that begin to lead to cultural change. Now, we've only had about 5, 6 so far. So there's not a lot of cultural change that's possible, but repeated practice with you, especially as you integrate this with multiple repeats with the same people, that makes a really big difference in how we're able to learn, remember, and it's one of the learning principles that's really critical, is that people around us also start to speak the same language. Now, when we talk about what practices or structures support you having to do your daily teach to learn, I'm going to go backwards from our sequence. So, Rayanne, what's a practice that we can have that ensure that we're actually holding our own teach to learn conversations on a regular basis?
Make ourselves little assignments, put it on our calendar.
Put it on the calendar, exactly. Heidi.
I would say the same thing. It's important to schedule it and to take the time to do it.
Okay, schedule it, take the time. Eric?
What I've done is I've got a meeting at 9 with my staff, and I try to take a principle and put it in there as something that we're trying to revamp in the department anyway.
That's great. In one sense, what you've done, I'm going to go a little bit further and say you've added it as an agenda item to a meeting, and that it's a concept that's now, here's the thing we're going to talk about today. We know we're going to talk about a concept. Here's today's concept. So it's right there present for you. Joe.
What was the question?
What's a practice or structure that supports you in having a daily teach to learn conversation?
I'll schedule it on the calendar.
On a calendar, like an appointment. Yep. Denise?
Yep.
I mean, we keep each other on track by coming to this meeting, but also I'm trying to make certain that I don't seek out the same kind of group of people who would provide similar input. I'm trying to make sure I seek out, different levels of learning.
I got it. So the people around you, your coworkers, are structures for that. And you also mentioned having a partner. Like you've got Joe to support you in your conversation with that. Megan.
Pretty much what everyone else is saying. Try and put it on your calendar. I try and seek out different departments but at the same time, I feel bad for like saying, hey, can I come in and, give me 15 minutes of your time because I know everyone's busy. So I kind of feel like I fall back to the same people that I have already talked to.
So, and actually, the same people is an okay thing. When we look at people who studied networks that have an influence on causing change, it's the strong tie networks, not the weak tie networks. So people that have a regular interaction, if you get 25 to 30% of those people doing the same thing or talking about the same thing, then you have a good chance of having that entire network shift over to the new approach. So actually doing repeated conversations with people is a good thing. If you're going to go back to some of those groups, you might say ahead of time, hey, I'm coming tomorrow, or I'm going to be coming, so here's what I'm, like just put me on your agenda for a minute. So here's some other things that support the practices or structures that support having a daily teach to learn conversation. First of all, make and keep the commitment. However you keep commitments in your life, do that. Schedule it as a calendar appointment. We've said that. Request support from coworkers. Like, please hold me accountable for my promise to have this daily teach to learn. And you could ask me towards the end, have someone say, listen, ask me towards the end of the day, or maybe after lunch, hey, have you had your conversation yet? If not, maybe they would be willing to volunteer. Identify your 5 learning partners. Remember on the Teach to Learn form, it says, please make sure you talk with at least 5 different people. So who are those ahead of time? At the beginning of each unit, there's going to be 5 people at least that you should talk to. Schedule, when you say, I'm going to put it in my calendar as an appointment, ask them to put it in their calendar as an appointment. So you're not running around looking for people. And then track completion progress on a visual display. For instance, these are the Teach to Learn conversations for Unit 1. And as you complete them, you've got some display that says, I've checked them off. So you can see visual progress, and maybe the support from your coworkers shows up as, hey, I don't see a check mark on yesterday's, let's have a conversation about that. So any final thoughts about our daily Teach to Learn conversations around either the benefits or the practices to ensure that we've got them in our day, that we don't overlook them? Any thoughts?
I think it's helping build a team.
It does. Especially, I tell you, in one of the recent academies, there was a person who had been doing Teach to Learn conversations. An interesting topic came up. She asked a cube mate to participate with her. And someone from over the wall who had been part of previous Teach to Learn conversations says, hey, can I come too? Like, they started getting excited about participating because it's a learning opportunity. We're talking about concepts that a lot of people don't get a chance to talk about at work. So it's very useful. In fact, I want to show you a good example. Here's one from Danny. She had to not be here today. She had a previously scheduled appointment. So if we look at what she's done, first of all, on our form, remember, we have at least 5 different people that we want to hold a conversation with. And then make sure that at least 7 of those people that you're talking with are at your own facility. 2 can be outside your area of responsibility. Like, Heidi, I think you spoke with your husband. That's appropriate to have one of your conversations with someone at home, that kind of thing. So, and Danny does a very good job of listing some things here. She talked about the concept she talked about. She wrote probably more than is necessary, but she said, I discussed landmarks in psychology with my coworker and what we focused on. And then here's some interesting things. She has very interesting conversation about, first of all, here's what's helpful for me when I teach. I had a question about, are your bullet points always necessary? Like, as you feel more comfortable with the topic, maybe I don't even need reference material. I just need a topic, but maybe not. Some people write a little mini mind map as they prepare for their conversation. It helps me focus. So then opening a dialogue also helps the information flow. And then here's where the discussion flowed, talked about trust as being paramount. And then she also said, here's a personal experience I had. Like I learned some of these things, unfortunately the hard way in past employment. So that the insights I gained about myself while attempting to teach the concept is one of the key things that we want recorded here. And I think Danny did a really good job of making that show up that way. So let's move on. So you're in the middle of getting these 14-point scoring grids scored, submitted, and then discussed. And you could use this as one of your daily teach to learn conversations, or it might be just a useful group conversation. Now, we've already had one submission that said, I don't want to put my name on this, not a classmate, but someone who was filling out said, I don't want my scores connected with my name. That's okay to acknowledge that there might be some fear in the organization, and that person did write 0 on point 8, like drive out fear. So, we want to be careful about people's requests for, anonymity of some sort, but it's not required that they put their name on. You can just put anonymous, and that's okay. If they want to fill out their name, they don't want to be tied to their responses. Any issues that you're running into as far as filling out the 14 points scoring grid with 2 other people?
For me,
No.
it's just timing. There's so much
Timing?
weather, and we've been on the roofs clearing snow. It's just hard to keep up sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's another opportunity to put something on the calendar. And again, of course, we're planning a move from which to learn. That's the intent of the PDSA cycle, is to learn something so then we can make an improvement. And of course, the plan includes predicting outcomes or observations. Now, I'd like you to take out another piece of paper or another place to write. I'd like you to write, please, your definition of a system. Today's topic is appreciation for a system. And please write your definition for a system. Do you recall Dr. Deming's definition of a system? He wrote this is in our book. A system is a network of interdependent components that work together to try to accomplish the aim of the system. We're going to dive into deeper depth with that in Unit 3, but I'd like you to do something. On your definition, either circle or write these words or put a check mark where they appear. Do you have network in your definition? Interdependent, work together, try to accomplish, and aim of the system. Any of those words or phrases show up in your definition?
I don't know about words or phrases, but my definition was multiple working parts coming together for a common goal. So, I mean, there's similarities.
There are some similarities, yep. Yeah, so the multiple parts, so, the parts are interdependent. That's a critical part of that. And then the common goal is the aim of the system. Here's what we're trying to accomplish, right? And working together, of course, is one of the critical things. So this is a very important definition as we begin to work to understand, well, what do we mean by appreciation for a system? It's important to remember this definition when we're talking about what a system is. We're going to go over a couple principles as we go through this today. First of all, I want you to thank you for sending in your org charts. A couple of you did. Here's our typical organization chart. It's just an example from a real bank, but they have this structure in place. Oakview has this structure in place. Looks kind of similar, doesn't it? You could almost like swipe out the name, and the same thing. Here's the other thing that's interesting is Heidi, I think you added an addendum to here's what's going on in our organization. So each of these organization charts typically have sometimes names associated with them. There's certainly dates attached, and then what we find is they're rapidly out of date. They're not always current, right? So we find that there's moving parts. Sometimes positions appear and disappear. Other times people appear and disappear. Mm-hmm. Dr. Deming had a much different perspective on what a system looks like. So he drew this image. And because he defined it as a network of interdependent components that work together to try to accomplish the aim of the system, when all the connections and interactions are working together to accomplish a shared aim, an organization can achieve tremendous results, from improving quality of its products and services to raising the morale of the entire organization. We see here he includes customers and suppliers in his perspective on this is what's included in our system. And they become a part of the system. They're not separate or outside of the system. And improvement activity is designed in, it's not bolted on. So design and redesign is where improvement activity is designated in the organization. And certainly innovation shows up as an element of what he described as part of our system. It's an ongoing, regular part. And then if we want to, we could actually lay out the PDSA cycle on top of this structure and see that we have planning, we have doing, and then we have study, and then we act in a variety of ways that try to integrate that. Now, we have a slightly modified model that we're going to be using to complete one of our assignments this morning. And that's this one where we move it to these boxes. And basically the boxes that we here are representative. If they represent, here's the elements of what Dr. Deming put together. So we're not creating a new image. We're just saying, all right, we put some structure around the components of the system that he has. Now, what I'd like you to do, you've got pre-work that'll show up for Unit 3 on Appreciation for a System to do more detailed work on completing this diagram. But first of all, I'd like you to take a moment. This is a handout from the LMS, but you can do this manually if you don't have the paper available. I'd like you to list and reflect upon the differences you notice between the two views of an organization, especially work and how it's performed. Where do we see it? Where do we not see it? Where do we see customers and suppliers? What do you notice about each view? What do we notice about who's important? Which images provide this is important in this view and something else might be important in another view? How does teamwork show up in these images? So take a couple minutes and list those things. What do you notice about each view and perhaps the differences between the views?
Eric, is that in one of the PDFs for today?
Yes, it should be in the exercise. I can pull that up.
Was it in?
It's in 107, and it's in the number 4 in-class exercise.
All right. Thank
So
you.
there's 2 files there that you can download. One is that one, 2 views. And this is what I'd like you to submit as an assignment. the daily teach to learn is just a reminder. So there, even though there's 2 files there, just some, you can just submit that one. I'll change this to assignment to a 1-point assignment. So if you, here I'll show you. It's so the in-class exercise is 107. We covered this already, and then now we've got this one we're working on, and this is the one you'll be submitting. Although I think this is just, I don't think this is a fillable PDF. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So you might have some problems with that. If you just give me 2 lists, if you give me a file with 2 lists, that's sufficient. Just please name it with the same name. 107, 2 views, put your last name in it, and then if it's PDF, fine. If it's document, fine. Have I not been sharing my screen?
No.
No.
So here's my request. If I do something silly like that again, let me know. Like I didn't realize, I thought I was showing you some things, and obviously I wasn't. So we had all these wonderful diagrams, and so okay, I'm going to give you a few more. I'm going to let you finish up that after we complete, if that's okay. What do you have so far? What are some differences that you notice? What do we see about workflows? What are your comments there?
The workflow I feel like is more broke down.
Can we see how work flows in this
Oh,
typical
sorry,
view?
that's the other one.
And so, do we have any opportunity to see how work is performed when we look at the org chart?
No.
No, we don't see a flow. How about? Go ahead.
No, I don't see any flow on the org chart.
No, not at all. How about in the system view? How about where do we see customers? On which chart do we see customers are part of our system?
That's going to be on the system view rather than the org chart.
Right. And yet, every day we talk about the importance of our residents and their families, and yet they're not on our view of our organization. How about suppliers? They're critical to our work. Where do they show up?
In the
Not
system.
on the org chart.
Exactly. How about learning? Does learning show up on a particular chart? We see feedback loops here. Is there any opportunity for learning in the org chart view?
No.
Probably not. And then what's the relationship of teamwork on each one? Is there an assumption of where teams are?
Yeah, there's an assumption that the blue squares are all in one management team, and then the other ones below it
Right.
together are a team.
And yet here we may see that there's interactions between people as they do their work. Now, who do we see as important on each chart? Is there an assumption about importance?
Well, on the org chart, of course, it's going to be the top person, at the top of the chart,
Yeah.
which, like you were saying just a minute ago, but really in our business, it should be the residents that are the most important. Then we just kind of stem out from the residents,
Right. Right. Okay, so please continue on noticing those things. Here's a principle we have about a system. It's a whole which cannot be divided into independent parts, which is one of the things we do with our typical perspective on our organization. So here's a little illustration of that. Dividing a cow in half does not give you two smaller cows. So it's one cow. You split it in half, you don't have a cow anymore. In our system, you split a system in half, you don't have a system anymore. And yet we manage as if we could do that. So we're walking around with, cows sliced up in different pieces basically with our organizations. If we manage in the perspective that the org chart drives how we interact with each other. Another key definition is without a name, there is no system. Now, Dr. Deming suggested that the aim is actually a value statement. We're, of course, talking here about human-made systems. So he's not talking about systems found in nature. And a system must be managed. It will not manage itself. And it requires knowledge of the interrelationships between components and the people that work in it. So this is a critical aspect of management in a system, is we don't manage the people or parts, we manage the interrelationships. And there's a big distinction, and there's a reason why Deming's chart has arrows, because we're looking at the relationships between functions and processes. We're not looking at, I'm going to manage a box and not pay attention to the arrows that exist between people. So the secret is cooperation between components toward the aim of this organization. Sometimes we experience lack of cooperation as silos, people with conflicting aims just because they're in different departments, those kind of things. And silos are not a natural part of organizational life. Silos are a natural part of a certain style of management. And we see that reflected in the image that we use to depict our organization. So silos often arise from those reporting structures rather than something else. So focus. What one element of a system should be a manager's primary focus? Any thoughts?
I thought Rayanne said it well when she said for us residents, which is your customers. So how are you providing quality as we discussed in the previous day, to those customers, which hopefully is building your team to provide that quality.
Yeah, so if we're gonna provide quality to our team, there's something we need to focus on, because you can have a team, but the team would be structured in vastly different ways. The same carbon atoms make a lead pencil as make up a diamond, but how they're connected makes a vast difference. So one of the things we want to look at is the basic managerial idea introduced by system thinking is that to manage a system effectively, you must focus on the interactions of the parts rather than their behavior taken separately. So it's how we work together that's critical. I had an experience of working at an organization, People Systems Division. We were supporting all the human resource systems on the General Motors account. And we spent about 2 months trying to realign our organizational structure from vertical to horizontal, thinking that was the thing we should do. And we set up basically horizontal org charts. Then I go to a Deming seminar, and I'm sitting next to Bill Schirkenbach, who was one of the people that led Deming's work at Ford. And then when he went to GM, he brought Bill there. I showed him our chart. I was very proud of the before after. And we spent a serious amount of time with our leadership team. And Bill looks at it and says, well, that doesn't matter. And I thought, oh my gosh, we just wasted our time. I said, why not? And he said, it's how you communicate and work together that matters, not how you're arranged in an organizational structure. So that was a very useful lesson for me. I wish I would have learned it, like 2 months before that, but it's a very useful lesson to say we need to focus on how we interact and communicate rather than who reports to whom. So you have an assignment that I'd like you to fill out. It's an exercise for today. The exercise is around, I'd like you to make a note or describe where you do this thing. And it isn't a question of whether or not I don't do it. It's you do something like this. And this relates to the numbers here relate to the numbers that are on the chart that we built from Deming's view. So what's an activity or function that you do that produces or contributes to producing something, either an item or a service or data that is used or consumed by someone in your organization? So you do something that somebody either externally or internally uses. So what is that kind of thing? And then you have interactions with groups or people that provide you with something that you use on your job. So that's the support kind of function. What kind of support functions do you interact with people around HR, IT, housekeeping? Those kind of things are support functions. And what's a time that you or a group have changed, updated, or altered something, or made something in the way work is performed, or done something in the way, changed something in the way work is performed? That's the redesign function. You're doing it with PDSA cycles. What else have you done in your organization that looks like improvement? And then what's an example of where you've checked or verified the function or cost of a tool, software process, or vendor selection? Or an example of where you've been given training. That's the box number 7. And then, so there's a form, there's actually a form that we have. I want to see if I can find it. Well, I won't track it down right now. I want to finish this. What are your main customers, and who are your main customers, and how do you contribute to them? And then how do you learn about what your customers' needs, requirements, and preferences are? And then finally, a specific contribution you make to the products or services created by your organization. So I'm going to find quickly here. Where to go. There's a document that we have in our folders. It's the handout. So this form matches the items that we were just going over. I think this lets you blow this up, right? Yep. So it's the same list except in document form that I'd like you where you document this. And this is in the number 3 section right now. It's a handout. So the same things that I listed are included here in this handout. And just please fill out the form and let me know where you've done or have participated in some type of activity like that. There's a little legend up here that came from my diagram from our slides that you can look at as well. Any questions on this? Okay. Yeah, there it is. And that's the name of the file. Oh, I had it set up so I could actually call it up. All I had to do is click a little bit. I think, Megan, I'm a little off my game today. So it's like, I'm having one of those days this morning. So I can appreciate what you were going through yesterday. Oh yeah, here's the representation. So if we go back and forth from this diagram to this is where those different elements that I've asked you to talk about show up on your diagram. And these are in there's slide of PDFs number 2 on the 107 section in the LMS. This just is a simplified version of that. So then, anything else I'd like you to think of? Add another note about how each view depicts an individual's participation in or contribution to the organization. So based on the fact that you probably participate in almost every one of these boxes in some fashion. Like you've done almost all of these activities, if not all of these activities, either during a week or across the span of a year. And yet, when we look at these different views, which one represents an individual's participation or contribution better? Any comments?
The system view.
And why is that? Why does the system view represent an individual's contributions or participation in the organization better than the typical org chart view?
Addresses function better. I mean, I've never found the organizational chart to really be helpful outside of like chain of command and who you report to.
Exactly.
It reflects the work of the day.
It doesn't. This is much closer. I mean, it's very generic. This view is very generic, but it's still closer to, this is the general flow of work in the organization. This doesn't show anything about who's the boss and who's important, or there's a reporting process or sort of thing. So that's an important distinction to make as we look at these things. So please turn in your system activity notes. That's the diagram the form we were just looking at. And consider taking on some of the practices that have your teach to learn conversations be a daily practice. So what are those things that you can put in place on a regular basis that have them show up, done deal, no doubt about it, I get it done? Because here's the basic question. Where is the academy learning occurring?
We should be putting it into practice, in our everyday lives, not just, and not that the mornings aren't important with you, but we're trying to put this into a practice to be usable.
Yeah, the academy learning doesn't take place here. This is just a starting point. The real learning occurs when you try to have a conversation about these concepts in your organization, and when you try to put them to work in your plan, do, study, act cycles. When you try to produce improvement, that's when you start to look at, oh, these are the things I should be paying attention to when I produce improvement. So now when you go back to your PDSA cycle, one of the things you're going to look at is, well, what are the key interactions that are here? So Megan, when you set up your test, do you remember one of the first things I asked you about when you scheduled the stand-up meeting, the daily huddle? What was one of the first things?
What you asked me?
Yeah, do you remember?
Mm. Is
I
anybody
asked-
going to show?
Well, and why? Because I said, is that a normal way to communicate with those people?
Oh,
Remember that?
when I put my flyers up in their cart rooms.
Yep. And that question is an example of managing the interactions. Like, how do we actually interact with people? I asked you, is that the standard way of interacting? So you want to begin to ask those kind of questions when you address your improvement projects now with the principles that we just learned today. So here's our 2 quotes for application to our mind maps. First of all, once we know the outcome of something, that knowledge skews our perception of what we thought before we knew the outcome. That's hindsight bias. This is why we write down our predictions, so we don't have hindsight bias during our PDSA cycles. And then the purpose of taking data, they're not taken for museum purposes. They're taken as a basis for doing something. If nothing is to be done with the data, then there's no use for collecting any. The ultimate purpose of taking data is to provide a basis for action or a recommendation for action. The step immediately between the collection of data and the action is prediction. All right, I'm a minute over. Again, I'm having a good day here, so. So thank you, everyone. Anything else you want me to cover before we conclude? All right, thank
I do
you.
have a question.
Oh, yes, go ahead,
I
Heidi.
do have a question on that PDSA form from yesterday.
Yes.
Am I supposed to be making a new change, like a new font size on the menu, or is it still talking about the other one that I had been doing?
Well, you learned something from last week. Now, what's the next thing you're going to be doing? So that's the new test. What's the next test?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Bye now.
All right.